But isn't it good to have some people back on site? Isn't it good to be here? It is finally here, the big return. And I have got to tell you, I have been thinking about this day for a very long time. Ever since the government first announced that there was going to be a change in the restrictions, ever since they first had that roadmap that was going to bring us out of lockdown, I began dreaming of this day. Of the day when we could again gather on site as well as online, when we could sing together and we could socialize together. But then things didn't quite go the way that I'd expected. Because I guess if I'm really honest, what I thought would be happening was that the number of cases of COVID-19 in our country would continue to go down and down and down, and as the number of people being vaccinated went up and up, that when we came back together for the big return, we wouldn't be wearing masks, we wouldn't be thinking about distancing, we wouldn't have to navigate any of that stuff. And yet here we are. We're still singing, but we're singing through masks. And as the day came closer, it became clear that we were going to have to take certain measures. Not that we would be legally required to take certain measures, but it would be irresponsible of us not to put in place certain measures to reduce the spread and keep people safe. And hopefully help people feel comfortable to return. We appreciate that there may be people watching online who still aren't sure about being in a room full of people, and we understand that. It's so good that we can gather together on site as well, but I think that tension that we felt as we were planning this service, that tension that we find ourselves in kind of echoes what we experience in life in general, doesn't it? That we're caught in this weird moment between what used to be and what could be. Like we're leaving behind the challenges of the past year and a half, but actually we're not quite in the freedom that we were hoping for. And our church experience demonstrates this. We're back on site singing like we used to, but we're singing through mass. A constant reminder that life is not quite back to how it used to be. There's that hope, perhaps, that there are better days still to come, but it's tempered by the limitations that we still face. We're living in this kind of limbo, aren't we? Restrictions have eased, but uncertainty remains. We don't have to take all of these precautions, legally speaking, but the number of COVID cases remains high, and we have to do something to limit the spread. We're caught between the return to how things used to be, yet still facing much anxiety about how we can and should move forward. It feels like we're caught at a point of tension between two different challenges. It's a bit like we're attached to two different weights. And I figured to help with this, I'd make the weights. This is one of the reasons my wife does CrossFit, is so that I've got props. You might not have heard my wife does CrossFit if you've, say, never spoken to her. But we've got, on one hand, the weight of history, haven't we? We've got the sense of how things used to be. We've got an understanding about what life was once like. We've got all of those memories of how things were, and it can feel like we're kind of tied in some ways to the weight of history. But we have a load of uncertainty, that we think about what's going to happen in the future, but we actually are kind of unsure about what is still to come. You know, we find ourselves with this anxiety of what might go wrong if we make the wrong decisions at this time. So we end up in this weird place where we are kind of tied to the past and filled with trepidation about the future. And I think that we end up feeling like this in all sorts of different areas of life. It isn't just in church life that we experience this. I think we experience it in work life, for example. And maybe we have fond memories of what it was like to be in a bustling, busy office, bouncing off other people, working together instead of stuck in our spare room. And we remember the weight of the history of being in a room full of people. But actually, there's also that uncertainty about whether is it safe, is it okay? Can we be in a room full of people at the moment? Maybe we long for the days when we aren't working from home anymore. We love the idea that we'd be outside, and there's that weight of history of how things used to be, but there's also that uncertainty of, well, actually, like, I've learned a different rhythm in lockdown. I've learned a different way of working. Maybe it's not so stressful. Maybe it's a bit freer. Maybe I have a bit more time for my family, and there's an uncertainty about whether we want to go back in this direction again. Maybe in our relationships, that actually we are excited because we remember some of our long-standing friendships, people we haven't seen in so long, but we're unsure about how we're going to get on. We've seen what they posted online, and we're not sure whether we still agree with each other. We're not sure whether we're still going to get on together. Maybe we have fond memories of the times when we socialized with other people, but actually we're unsure about whether we should socialize just yet. Whether we should be outside, whether we should be in mass, how many people it's okay to get together. We are caught between the weight of history and a load of uncertainty. And what happens when you add the weight of history to a load of uncertainty? I think you get a loss of momentum. It kills your forward movement. You can't move forward as easily, as freely. You can't move forward with the same excitement and expectation and energy that we once did. And I think this creates a challenge for us, even in a church context, that we remember what it's like to be together with people in a room and how exciting it is, but we're unsure about what that means. Maybe there's things that we remember doing, we remember serving, we remember the joy of it, we remember the excitement of it, but, well, we're uncertain about whether we are ready to commit that time and that energy again. As we caught between these two different things, I think that there's a danger that we become susceptible to what we might call stay put syndrome. Now, held back between the two weights, we might find ourselves saying, well, why don't I just stay where I am instead? Would it be so bad if I didn't move forward? Would it matter so much if I just stayed here? I've got another prop. It's a pillow. It's my stay put pillow. Because I think stay put syndrome is a bit like staying in bed. Is there anybody here who has a problem with snoozing? Let's see a raise of the hand in the room if you are a chronic snoozer, if you are a striker of the snooze button in the morning. Put a hand up emoji in the chat online if that's you. There's not many people in the room. They're all looking at me like, we made it here for 10 a.m., Phil. Obviously, we're not snoozers. Well, if you're a snoozer online, I'm a snoozer. My alarm, I have an alarm where I have to take a photo of something elsewhere in my house to make sure that I get out of bed. I am susceptible to the snooze. And I'm aware that, this might be a little bit close to home for some people as we're here in an earlier morning service, that actually, our first on-site, did anybody struggle to get up this morning? No. Still no, you did. There we go. A few people did. Maybe you're online today because you lost the battle with the snooze button. And we know there's lots of reasons why you might be online. We're not judging you at all. Maybe you're catching up later or watching online because you lost the battle with the snooze. But I think one of the challenges is that staying in bed is a good analogy for stay put syndrome, because sometimes we stay in bed because it's warm and cozy, right? Sometimes we stay in bed because it feels safe and it feels comfortable. But sometimes we stay in bed because we don't want to face what's outside of bed. Sometimes we stay in bed because we are worn out by what we've been going through, because the weight of history has worn us down. And sometimes we stay in bed because we are uncertain about what's to come, because we don't know if we can face the day, and the load of uncertainty leads us to stay put instead. So faced with the weight of the past and a load of uncertainty, isn't it just easier to stay where we are? Maybe staying in bed, we kind of know that probably isn't okay, but maybe it's okay to stay somewhere that's safe and comfortable. Shouldn't we just stay where we are for now? You can have that back, darling, but don't use it during this. We're going to explore a conversation in which Jesus speaks to these same challenges. And I don't know if it will be immediately apparent how he does so, but please stay with me. Even if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian in the room or watching online, I would encourage you to stay with us, because it may not be immediately apparent how, but this passage, this conversation with Jesus speaks to this stay put syndrome. And we're going to read from Matthew 17. It says in Matthew 17 that after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. This is a dazzling moment for the disciples. This is a stunning, spectacular experience as Jesus is transformed before their very eyes. His face shining like the sun, his clothes as bright as light. If we try and replicate this today, we won't manage it. Let's turn the house lights down as far as they go, and let's turn the face lights on me up as high as they can. And even then, even with all of this tech at our disposal, we still don't catch the full force of what was happening with Jesus here, because while all of this light is shining on me, the light was shining in him. And actually what they see is Jesus' divinity breaking out, his deity breaking out of his humanity. They catch a glimpse of the power and authority that Jesus holds beyond his mortal form. We can turn the lights back again. As if that wasn't enough, Moses and Elijah appear. We're partway through a series called Talking to Jesus, but it's who is talking with Jesus that is first striking here. Because these are two key figures from Jewish history. Two of the most influential individuals ever to play their part on God's behalf. And their appearance is significant in its own right, but it's even more powerful when you understand what they represent. Because Moses represents the law, the commandments laid down by God to guide his chosen people to the best possible life. And Elijah represents the prophets, those called by God to speak truth in the face of opposition, to call people back to right living, to guide them to God's truth when they went astray, and inspire them toward a brighter future when life was tough. The law and the prophets provide the basis for the Jewish understanding of God. All that they believed stood on the foundations of these twin institutions. And here, Jesus is in their midst. With the benefit of hindsight, we know that Jesus came as the fulfillment of both of these aspects of Jewish understanding. He came to fulfill the law and all of its requirements, to tick all of the boxes required to allow us to have right relationship with God. And he came as the fulfillment of centuries of prophecy. His life, the fruition of countless promises of what the chosen one of God would be like. And as if that wasn't enough, Jesus here is audibly commended by God. "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And we might be inclined to skip past this bit, because many of us would take for granted the thought that Jesus is the Son of God. Even if we don't believe it, we might have heard that other people believe it. But this was revolutionary in its day. The idea that God's own Son could be born in human form, that God himself would humble himself to the frailty of humanity, was unheard of. It was revolutionary. The disciples had no frame of reference to this. And Peter's response to this is really interesting. And it's really helpful when we think about those challenges that we're facing. You see, at first, Peter asks if he should build a shelter. And you're thinking, Peter, what on earth are you on about, mate? Jesus is there talking to Moses and Elijah, and Peter's like, "Hi, guys, do you want me to build a tent? Do you want me to Bear Grylls it out here?" But what's he actually saying? He's saying, it's good here. Should we stay here? Should we stay where we are? Should I build something that means that we can stay? Peter is asking whether they should stay. But before anyone can answer, God himself interrupts. That's right. He is cut off by the audible voice of God. Imagine that. "Hello, this is God." I'm pausing here just to check. No, it's okay. We'll keep going. He's interrupted by God. And the disciples, as this cloud of brilliant light descends, the disciples are terrified. The passage tells us that they fall face down. And so Peter's posture changes, but his response does not. Peter is still saying put, but only now he isn't really asking, he's cowering. He's gone from staying put, but standing, to staying put, but on his knees. He is rightly overwhelmed by this moment. He is caught not only by a sense of the weight of history as he sees Elijah and Moses, but by this sudden uncertainty about what the future holds. Peter had given up all that he had to follow Jesus, and all of a sudden he realizes that this guy that he's been following is far more powerful than he had ever imagined. And Peter suddenly feels inadequate. He's not staying put because he likes the moment. He's staying put because he feels so helpless, so powerless, so inadequate in the face of God. He's not just experiencing some trepidation about the future. He is terrified of moving forward. He is staying put squared. He is staying put on top of staying put. And what is it that Jesus says to him? When Jesus comes over and he touches him and he says, "Get up. Don't be afraid." He goes from being tied to the past to staying put because of a fear of the future. But Jesus says, "Get up." He reassures him with his presence. And then the next thing that we read is this. It says, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus tells Peter to get up and to get moving. And as they are coming down the mountain, Jesus swears them to silence. But as he does so, he focuses on the future. It says that Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And Jesus is alluding here to his own death and resurrection, to how he would die, to take upon himself all of the stuff that should separate us from God. More than that, he's speaking of the day when he will be raised to life, conquering death and opening up a way for each and every one of us to step not with fear and trepidation, but with boldness and confidence into the presence of God. And for the disciples, this is a glimpse of a future promise. For Jesus, here is one who is called onward by a sense of what's to come. Jesus shoulders the weight of history and the load of uncertainty as he heads down that mountain, taking another step toward the purpose of God. There is one further part of the conversation that we need to read. The disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and he will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." And then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. The disciples are basically saying, hey, when is all of this going to begin? We know that Elijah needs to come first, and then it starts off. And Jesus says, no, no, no. The prophet you are expecting has already been. You didn't recognize him. They realized that he was talking about John the Baptist, the one who had challenged the status quo, who had called people to repentance, who had heralded Jesus' arrival, and who had been put to death himself. What is Jesus saying here? He's saying you're waiting on God to start moving, but God is already at work. He's waiting in the future. His work is already well underway. And the Son of Man, Jesus, is the one who will suffer and pave the way for you to step into that purpose too. Jesus then does not allow us to stay put, but calls us to step into the future with him. The significance of his call is greater than our desire to stay put. He calls us to be part of the story of God being worked out across the ages and throughout the generations, to set aside the weights that we once carried, to get up, get moving, and to follow his call. Instead of succumbing to stay put syndrome, we should take another step forward in the unfolding story of God. Instead of succumbing to stay put syndrome, we should take another step forward in the unfolding story of God. But how can we actually do that? What does it look like to practically shake off the ropes that restrain us and move forward into the life that God has for us? Well, the first thing we need to do is to honor the past, but not hold it too tightly. Because all that had gone before had set the platform for Jesus' ministry. And his arrival would have been monumental without it, but it provided a foundation for a fuller understanding and a more enduring impact when Jesus arrived. But if the disciples had only been focused on the law and the prophets, as some were, they would have missed what God was doing right in front of them. And as we consider the weight of history, there is much that we can learn from what's past. But we shouldn't hold it so tightly that we miss out on what's next. I've heard it put this way: the past makes a great library, but a terrible hotel. In other words, we should learn from it, but we shouldn't stay there. And from a practical perspective, we should ask ourselves, what lessons can we learn from the past? What principles can we carry forward? And we should leave the rest behind. In a church context, I'm reminded of the foundational values that shape our church. Our vision, the salvation of our city, our mission to reach people, influence culture, and build future. Our cultural distinctives of being motivated by the cause of Christ, servanthood, flowing together, generosity, and the pursuit of excellence. These are foundations upon which who we are as a church is built. These things are not going to change. But what we shouldn't hold on too tightly to is the way that we do things. We should hold to the principles of the past, but we have to reinterpret them in the new future. So we should honor the past, but we should not hold it too tightly. Secondly, we should embrace the experience, but we shouldn't chase the spectacular. Because there's something so powerful about being in the presence of God. We don't have to fear as Peter did, because Jesus has wiped clear all of our shortcomings, all of our missteps and mistakes, all of the stuff that should separate us from God has been cleared away, so we can boldly and confidently enjoy coming into the presence of God. But Jesus didn't want his followers to stay on the mountain enjoying the light show. God doesn't only speak in the spectacular moments. Instead, Jesus leads them back down the mountain into the challenges that were much more mundane. As you read on Matthew 17, pretty soon Jesus is back healing people and teaching his disciples, and he steps straight back into it. And it isn't as spectacular as the mountaintop moment, but it sure is significant. But Jesus is there in both aspects. What that means is that we don't need the spectacular to experience the presence of God. We should embrace those awe-inspiring moments when they come, the times that we can gather together and worship is so powerful. We should embrace them and take everything from them that we can, but we shouldn't chase after those alone or linger too long when they are done. We're not meant to camp in the place of his presence. We're meant to carry his presence as we pursue his purpose in the world. In the church right now, it would be so easy for us to just focus on gathering. You know, we've been restricted to an online expression for so long, it would be easy for us to place our full attention on this opportunity to come together on site. But Jesus and his disciples did not stay on that mountain, and so we are not only called to gather, we are also called to get up and go. This is the great ebb and flow of the church, that we are called to come together as a community, but we are called to reach out to those in our world. That we do not have to choose between gathering and going, but we are called to both gather and to go. And just as the restrictions have limited our opportunities to gather physically, so they have limited the opportunities to go and connect with people. And we need to redress the balance. So we need to embrace the experience when it happens, but we shouldn't chase the spectacular. We are called to gather and to go. And thirdly, don't impose your own agenda. Join Jesus where he's already at work. In what we've read, we see Peter trying for noble reasons to oppose his own agenda on Jesus. First by suggesting that they pitch some tents and stay where they are, and then by kneeling down and saying, yeah, you guys do it, I'm opting out. But Jesus has something for him that is beyond both. Remember the interaction that they had about John the Baptist? The disciples were waiting for a sign from God that he was about to start moving, but they had missed it. God was already at work. And as we consider the impact that we can have in the future, we shouldn't ask God to show us what he will do. We should ask him where he's already at work. Jesus goes ahead of us. He waits for us in the future. In fact, I'm not sure he's waiting. I think he's working to prepare a future for us. And if we're asking what God will do, we're asking the wrong question. We should ask him to show us where he's already at work. Because chances are that the seeds of your future are already in your hand. That doors are already opening, opportunities are arising, people and possibility is already crossing your path. The disciples had missed the role of John the Baptist because he didn't look the way that they expected. I think I'm going to talk about John the Baptist in my message on Sunday night next week. But what might you have missed because it didn't look the way that it expected? Maybe you're waiting for God's audible call, but the opportunity has opened up in front of you already. Let me say too that if you're stuck for a sense of what God is up to, remember that there is one thing that Jesus is definitely building, and you are part of it right now, his church. Jesus promised that he would build his church. We are just the co-laborers, but we are still co-laborers. There is still work for us to do. There is a part for us to play. And maybe that's where this begins for you. And there are so many ways that you can get involved, and now is such a great time to do it. And if you just fill in the connect form, proclaimers.com/connect, you can indicate on there that you want to get involved, and we will help you to find the team that is the best fit and a place where you can develop as well. When it comes to the opportunities in front of us, both in church and as we head out into the world, I think we need to get into the habit of praying, Jesus, show me where you're already at work. As I draw things to a conclusion, I think it's entirely understandable that we sometimes succumb to stay-put syndrome, that our ties to the past and trepidation about the future can so easily hold us back. But we cannot afford to stay put where we are when Jesus waits for us in the future, when God is already at work, when there is a world out there that needs to know his love and his power and his peace. It's been incredible to be here with you in this moment, but we cannot stay here all week. We should gather, but we must also go. So let's get up and get moving, because the world out there